Okay, so good afternoon. There were 3 people last time who weren't here on, I guess, the first day or whenever we allocated or laid out the groups. So I assigned you to groups that had fewer people than the average group. Is Henry Wang here? Okay. So you are in group number 4. I know you requested 3, but they had higher than average, so I couldn't add you. Sorry about that. And then is Vincent Long here? Nope. Okay. Dan Stroud? So you're in group number 2, which actually I think puts you sort of over towards that side of the room, which is also what you would request, I believe, right? Yes. Okay. Okay, so the agenda for today is the following. Basically, we're going to finish talking about sort of efficient allocations, and then we're going to start talking about externalities. And I think the externalities, basically, I'll start sort of talking in general terms. Then I'm going to give a specific example of a case in which there are lots and lots of externalities. But in between sort of the general discussion and then the specific example, we're just going to do like a little activity to break things up a little bit. I know it's Friday and we have Labor Day weekend and everything, so people are probably pretty eager to get out of here. So hopefully this will energize you a little bit and keep you from going to sleep, basically. So last time we sort of finished off, I was talking about what happens when you're thinking about a case where you're giving away a good, in this case parking, for free, which ideally, if you were trying to get an efficient allocation, you would be charging a price for. And sort of we went through 2 examples. One was an example where you just charge too low a price, and essentially you get overconsumption of the good, but there's like an upward sloping supply curve, and there's essentially, let's see if I guess I already passed it here. Yeah, so there's like this triangle worth of deadweight loss. And then the second case, which I was talking about, was this parking case, where what you end up with is this giant rectangle of deadweight loss. And so I wanted to just sort of reemphasize why it is that when you get in these situations where something else is taking the place of the pricing mechanism in order to ration demand, why it is that can involve a lot more sort of inefficiency or utility loss than a normal situation. And the intuition, again, is simply that, so if you thought about, like, say, the person who values parking the most, or the person who's all the way at the left-hand side of the graph, that person maybe values it at, say, like $20 per space or something like that. Like, they're willing to pay $20. And normally what would happen is maybe you go in, you provide parking at what the market price would be if you were going to have an efficient allocation, so that would be at P star. And so let's just say P star is $10, to just put a number on it. So what's going to happen then is essentially there's 2 people who are getting benefits out of that transaction. One is the consumer himself, so he's going to basically get a $10 benefit, right? Because he's paying he's paying $10 for something that's worth 20 to him. So the difference between those 2 numbers is $10, so he's basically getting $10 of consumer surplus. And then the other person who's getting a benefit is the parking provider, which might be like the city or it might be a private firm or whatever, but they're getting $10 of revenue that they wouldn't get if that parking space just was unfilled. So they're sort of accounting for the other $10. And so there's $20 sort of a total surplus that's being produced there, 10 for the consumer and 10 for the parking provider. Now let's move to a case in which you have, we'll say free parking, but of course there's too many people who want to park when it's free, so the consumer basically has to sort of drive around for a while. That wastes gas, it wastes time, and that's represented by this queuing cost. So there's that Q star value, which is basically the point at which the queuing cost is high enough to stop even more people from coming in and continuing to saturate the area with excess demand. So the way this graph is drawn, that might be about like $8 or so. So it's actually the case that the consumer himself or herself is better off in the queuing scenario than they were when they were being charged P star dollars, right? Because now, so let's say Q star is $8, they value the space at 20. The difference between those 2 numbers is $12, so they're actually capturing a little bit more consumer surplus than they were before. Right now they have $12 of surplus instead of $10. But overall, the economy is worse off because now the producer is capturing nothing. So that $8 Q star cost, that's just pure wasted time, right? It's not like there's anybody on the other side of the transaction who's benefiting from that. Whereas when the consumer was paying $10, there was somebody on the other side of the transaction who was benefiting from that. So that's where all of the waste is coming from, basically, in this scenario. Right. Yeah. And so you can see that actually consumer surplus here is going to be a little bit higher than in the case when you're charging P star dollars, and so the price is a little bit higher than Q star. But the difference is that now you're not capturing any revenue from the parking. So before you had all this revenue, which you could do something with, be it like lower taxes or provide more like street cleaning services or schools or whatever, and now all you have is wasted time, which nobody's really benefiting from it. Okay, so just to sort of wrap up here. So when we're talking, so I said that, in general, when we think about efficient allocations and efficient production decisions, we want to have what we call marginal cost pricing. So we want to set the price of the good equal to the marginal cost of producing that good, so the amount that it would cost to produce 1 more unit of that good in the market equilibrium. And in this case, maybe it's a little bit hard to think about like the marginal cost of space in the short run because I said the marginal cost is 0 in the sense that the space is already built, so it's just a sunk cost, but it's not like sort of like use it or lose it. It's not like you save money by not using it. But in this case, what you want to think about in those types of situations is that the marginal cost of the free space is basically the opportunity cost of allocating that space to somebody else who would value it. So at off-peak times, there could be an excess number of parking spaces. So if you're like going in the middle of the night or something into downtown where not that many people live, and it's maybe like a commercial district, there's going to be a lot of free spaces. And so if you go and park in that space, there essentially is no opportunity cost because nobody else was planning to fill it anyway, and there's 100 other free spaces all around you. So at that point, the efficient price would actually be to set the price of the space equal to the marginal cost, which is the opportunity cost, and that's 0. So you actually would not want to charge for parking in that case. And then in the other case, though, or sort of the more common case, there is competition for the spaces, and so the opportunity cost of allocating that space to you is that the person who next values it the most, the person who doesn't have a space now but has the highest valuation of that space among the population of people who don't have spaces, we could allocate it to them, and so that's the opportunity cost of allocating it to you instead. And the way that the way we set up the graph, basically everybody up until, so if you're charging P star dollars, everybody up through the person who valued it at P star dollars was getting a space, and then among the group of people who didn't have spaces, the person who valued it the most would have valued it at P star dollars. And so in that case, the opportunity cost of giving you that space as opposed to giving it to the person who next values it the most is P star dollars, and you want to set the price at P star dollars to be pricing it at that opportunity cost. It turns out that in general, the rule of thumb is that if you were actually like somebody in charge of like managing the transportation network and figuring out how to price parking, what you want to target is something like an 85% occupancy rate or so. So you're using almost all the spaces, but at the same time, it's possible for people to find space pretty quickly when they come in. They don't have to circle around for a long time. Then in the long run, though, of course, we think about producing more spaces or potentially taking spaces out of production by using the land for a different purpose. And in that case, then you want to think about what the opportunity cost of the land is plus the construction and maintenance costs of the building the space itself. So if you're like building a multi-story structure, then probably the construction cost and the maintenance cost would be the dominant cost. But if you're just thinking about like using sort of vacant land to build spaces, then you want to think about just the value of land in that area. So if the value of land is very low because you're out in the Central Valley or something like that, then you wouldn't want to set the price to be very high. Whereas if the value of land is high because you're like in downtown San Francisco or something, then the price should be high to reflect that. Okay, so then just to finish up here, so when people say there's a shortage of parking, what they really mean is usually that there's a shortage of free or underpriced parking. It turns out that there are like 3 to 4 spaces per car in the United States as a whole. So if you like look at the total number of parking spaces, the total number of cars is about approximately equivalent to the total number of people, so somewhere around 250 or 300 million or so. But there's about 1 billion parking spaces. It turns out that's actually enough to pay the entire state of Connecticut, but we still have a shortage of parking. And what we really mean by that in general is there's a shortage of free parking. So that if we set the cost down to 0, which is what it usually is, we're not always able to find a space. And that's just sort of what happens with almost any good when you try to fulfill demand at a 0 price or a near 0 price, which in turn just underscores the importance of setting prices equal to the marginal cost. Okay, so that sort of finishes up our section of talking about economic efficiency and how you actually can try to achieve allocations that will be economically efficient. And so the next thing that I want to talk about is essentially a market failure. And there are several different forms of market failure, but the one that we're really focusing on in this class, especially with regards to sort of environmental economics, is externalities. So we're going to talk about externalities for the rest of today. And then I guess Wednesday, since Monday is a holiday, we'll probably talk about the Coase theorem and maybe start talking about public goods as well. But externalities are really the focus of the field of environmental economics. So this is the issue that environmental economics really revolves around. And externalities, I think, is hopefully all of you know, but just to review, they're costs or benefits in a transaction or an activity that aren't reflected or captured by the buyer or the seller. So they're costs or benefits that are essentially accruing to some third party who isn't actually involved in the transaction. And I think they're usually, I guess it depends on sort of what class you took, but I think usually when you start talking about market failures, this is one of the first examples that you'll see in an economics class. Typically, we think of externalities as being negative, but there are such things as positive externalities as well. So just to give you some examples, so pollution, I think, is like a classic example of a negative externality. So you drive your car or operate your fireplace or whatever, that emits some pollution. It affects you a little bit, but it also affects everybody else in the region a little bit. And sort of the total net effects are going to be concentrated among other people rather than just on you, unless you happen to be like the only person living within 100 miles or something like that, which is pretty rare. So pollution is like a classic example of a negative externality. And then congestion is also an important negative externality, maybe in some ways actually even more important than pollution. So for example, if you were to choose to drive into San Francisco at 5 p.m. today, the road is probably pretty congested. You don't like that, but the reason that it is congested is because there are lots of other people also driving on the road. And as we add one more person, that person slows down everybody else. So they're all having a negative externality, or they're all imposing a negative externality on everybody else on the roadway, including you. And then you yourself, of course, are also imposing that same negative externality on everybody else. And then finally, vaccines are an example of a positive externality. So vaccination is something that didn't exist like 100 years ago for the most part, became very common. I would say after World War II or so, and now unfortunately it's becoming a little bit less common. So vaccines have positive externalities because diseases that are vaccinated against are usually communicable. So if you get vaccinated, then you are unlikely to get that disease, and that also means you're unlikely to spread it to somebody else. So what happens is what epidemiologists and public health people refer to as the herd effect. So if you have basically a group of people and a very high percentage of them are vaccinated, even the unvaccinated people generally have protection just because there aren't enough susceptible people for the disease to actually spread. So there's an important positive externality there, and that's actually an argument for why it shouldn't necessarily just be up to individual choice whether or not you want to get vaccinated or not. Because so you can think of if there's a positive externality to vaccination, then there's a negative externality to not getting vaccinated. So your choice to not get vaccinated, on the one hand, it's going to affect your risk of getting disease, which is sort of, that's your own private choice whether or not you want to be vaccinated or not. There are costs and there are benefits. But what's not sort of being accounted for in that calculation is that when you choose not to get vaccinated, you're actually going to impose risks on other people, and those risks are presumably not being reflected in your choice of whether or not you choose to get vaccinated. Okay, so vaccination is a case of positive externality, and there's some other cases as well, but I think that's like the classic example of a positive externality. Okay. So externalities basically represent a market failure because what happens is they drive a wedge between the perceived marginal costs, or in the case of vaccination, the marginal benefits, and the true marginal costs, or in the case of vaccination, the true marginal benefits. So in perfect competition, prices should reflect marginal costs. So the idea here is that excess profits will eventually get competed away, right? So if a company is charging above marginal cost and there's sort of an opportunity for excess profits, other companies are going to enter into that market, they're going to compete with each other, and eventually that excess profit will get competed away, and you get back to a situation where prices are equal to the marginal cost of producing the good. And in the sort of, from the framework that we're using as economists, that's like a good thing because when we have price being set equal to marginal cost, then we know we can get efficient production decisions and efficient allocations. But in the case of externalities, that logic breaks down basically because the perceived marginal costs from the consumer's perspective are not the same as the true marginal costs of the activity. So basically, in the case of negative externalities, the consumer's going to be paying a price that's lower than the true marginal cost of engaging in that activity. So when we have marginal cost pricing, we get an efficient allocation, but with externalities, the true marginal cost moves away from the perceived marginal cost. So just to give sort of a very simple and general example, you could think about a coal power plant. So coal is a dirty form of producing electricity. It's dirty both in terms of local air pollution, and then it's also dirty in the sense that it creates a lot of carbon. So certainly it's going to be dirtier than something like wind energy or solar energy, since those are zero emissions technologies. But even compared to natural gas, it's very dirty. So if you have like a gas-fired turbine, those are very efficient. They're sort of made more efficient by the fact that the exhaust from them can then also be used to drive like a second cycle of the turbine and recapture even more of it. And the fuel burns pretty cleanly, so there aren't a lot of local emissions in terms of degrading the local air quality. And it's also the amount of carbon produced per kilowatt hour is substantially lower than a coal power plant just because it's more efficient. So the coal power plant has this negative externality in terms of pollution and global warming, and let's just suppose that perhaps there's 5 cents of damage produced for every 1 kilowatt hour of electricity that it produces. So the consumer is going to pay 10 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity just because that's what the utility is charging them based on the cost of producing the power and then also some sort of distribution cost. But the true marginal cost of producing electricity might be, say, 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So in that sense, or in that case, the consumer is going to use too much electricity, right? Because they're going to face a price of 10 cents per kilowatt hour, but the total cost of producing the electricity on the margin is going to be 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So we're assuming that there's 10 cents of actual production cost, and then there's another 5 cents of damage in terms of air pollution and global warming and so forth that's not being reflected in the transaction. So ideally what you'd like to do is correct that and move back to an efficient allocation where the consumer is actually paying a price that's equal to the marginal cost. And the easiest or the most straightforward way to do that usually is to charge a corrective tax or a fee for electricity. that's produced by, say, a coal power plant at least. So what you want to do is you want to charge a fee of 5 cents per kilowatt hour in addition to the price that they're already paying. And once you add in that 5 cents, of course, the consumer is going to face a net price of 15 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's what we said the true marginal cost was. So you can think of sort of, there's two components. There's what we call the private marginal cost, which is the 10 cents per kilowatt hour that it's actually costing the utility to generate the power, and then there's this other component that we call the social marginal cost, which is this air pollution damage, and that's being valued at 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So electricity consumption, of course, is going to fall in that case once you start charging 15 cents per kilowatt hour relative to the initial case where you were charging 10 cents per kilowatt hour because the price goes up. We know usually demand curves are downward sloping, so as the price goes up, consumption falls. And you can think about sort of comparing this type of strategy to an alternative strategy where you just have some sort of mandatory cutback. So the mandatory cutback, so you can think, okay, well, let's set the price, let's increase the price such that we get a 20% cutback in total electricity production. So that's one strategy, and just for the sake of argument, let's say that that's what the 15 cent per kilowatt hour price achieves relative to the 10 cent per kilowatt hour price. The other possibility, though, is you can just kind of come in and have some regulation that says, well, everybody needs to cut their power by their electricity consumption by 20%. Obviously, if everybody's cutting by 20%, you're going to get a total reduction of 20%, and that will achieve the same sort of reduction, at least, even if it's not spread across people in the same way. So when you compare sort of this mandatory 20% cutback versus using the pricing mechanism by charging this corrective tax or fee, there's a couple advantages to using the corrective tax or fee versus this 20% cutback. So one clear advantage is efficiency, in the sense that when you have the mandatory cutback, there's probably some people for whom cutting back electricity is not that big a deal, and so they the way to think is that you wouldn't have to pay them all that much to cut back their electricity substantially. And then on the other hand, there's some people who may have very inelastic demand for electricity, so you might have to pay them a whole lot to actually achieve 20% cutback. Now, in the end, you're not paying them anything here because you're just mandating by law that they all have to cut back 20%. But if you think about what you'd like to be able to do in sort of a case where you're trying to come up with Pareto improving transactions, what you'd like to do is essentially have the case that for those guys for whom it's really cheap to cut back on electricity, they're going to sort of cut back a little bit more, and for the guys for whom it's really expensive to cut back on electricity, they'll cut back a little bit less. So maybe the guys for whom it's cheap cut back by 30%, and the guys for whom it's expensive cut back by only 10%, and you achieve an overall reduction of 20%, but you've actually achieved this at a lower cost. And if you want, you can even think about it in terms of like people engaging in trades, right? So the guy who has to cut back, or who you're only going to have to cut back 10% because it's expensive for him to cut back, he's willing to pay the other guy to basically cut back more for him, and the amount that he's willing to pay is greater than the amount that the other guy would actually need to be paid in order to cut back because he doesn't mind cutting back all that much, right? So there's basically a wedge there. There's like an opportunity for gains for trade in that the guy who so the guy who say cuts back only 10%, maybe he'd be willing to pay $5 to not have to cut back another 10% beyond that to achieve the 20% cutback, and the guy who cuts back all the way 30% might only have to accept like $1 or $2 to be incentivized to cut back there. So you're getting a gain in efficiency in the sense that you're really focusing the reductions on people for whom it's pretty cheap to cut back, and you're sort of easing away on reductions for people for whom it's very expensive to cut back. So there's an efficiency gain, and then I think you could also argue there's probably an equity gain. I mean, this is a little bit trickier because you don't really. So efficiency is a concept we've defined in terms of Pareto efficiency, at least. So we say that something's Pareto efficient when there are no longer any Pareto improving trades available. With equity, defining equity basically comes down to having some sort of metric for how you're valuing the utility of different people and what the social welfare function you're applying is. So whether or not you think something is equitable is obviously going to depend on those on how you choose that function and how you value different people or how you weight different people in it. But I think you could still make a case that there is sort of an equity improvement here in the sense that for some people it might be a huge hardship to cut back a lot, right? And so under the pricing scheme, those people are going to be able to have an alternative to cutting back all the way, achieving a full 20% reduction. Instead, they could only achieve maybe a 10% reduction and then essentially be paying a little bit more in terms of energy costs, right? Whereas when you have this mandatory thing, everybody is going to have to cut back 20%, and there's no sort of allowance to try to accommodate people for whom it really is like a very substantial hardship. Okay, so the second thing that I want to do is essentially just give an example of how even just in like everyday life there can be like 500,000 externalities. But before we do that, I just want to do like a short group activity to kind of break things up a little bit here. So this is not related to environmental economics at all. It is sort of related to statistics, which we'll have to do a little bit of later on. But I just want to have you guys thinking about probabilities, and I think it's an interesting problem that I can't really give to my grads, but is pretty interesting for undergrads. So this is going to be like a group activity. You're going to have maybe like 5 minutes or so to discuss the problem, and then you will write down your solutions and give them to me. And I guess if you get the solution right, then I'll mark that as some extra participation points for your group. You can't really lose anything here, so you have some incentive to try to get it, but don't think that you're going to be penalized for getting it wrong or anything. So what this is called is the Monty Hall problem. I don't know if anybody here has seen it before. If you have, then your group will have an advantage, but we'll see. And so the idea here is that you're thinking of participating in a game show. And in the game show, there's going to be 3 boxes. So we're going to say, just label them as number 1, 2, and 3. And the boxes, so you don't know what's inside the boxes. 2 of the boxes have nothing at all inside of them, and then one of them has a prize. So of course, what you'd like to do is figure out which box has the prize. You get to pick one box, and that's the box that you of course like to pick, but you don't know which one it is. So the structure of the game show is instead of just having you randomly pick a box and then seeing whether or not, and then they open it up and you see whether or not you won. There's actually a 2-step process. So in the first step, what happens is you're going to pick a box. So just to make it concrete, let's say you end up picking box number 2. So you pick box number 2, and then 1 and 3 are still there. And you know that since 2 of them are empty and 1 of them has a prize, that either 1 must be empty or 3 must be empty, or potentially both could be empty. But certainly they can't both have prizes in them because there's only 1 prize to be distributed among the boxes, right? So the game show host basically says, okay, either 1 or 3 is empty, so they're going to choose one of those boxes and show it to you, and it's going to be empty. So let's just say that they choose box